Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Rare Book Room. My name is Cynthia, and I help direct the events here at Strand. For a little bit of history, Strand was founded in 1927 by the Bass family over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled until, after over 92 years, Strand is the sole survivor, still run by the Bass family and still housing new and used books. Tonight, we're excited to welcome Mona Eltahawy for the launch of her book, The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls. Mona is an award-winning columnist and international public speaker on Arab and Muslim issues and global feminism, is the author of Headscarves and Hymens, Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution, and is a contributor to the New York Times opinion pages. Her commentaries have appeared in several other publications, and she is a regular guest analyst on various television and radio shows. Joining Mona is his fellow author and Strand alum, Leda Hong Fincher. Leda is the author of Betraying Big Brother, The Feminist Awakening in China, and Leftover Women, The Resurgence of Gender Inequality in China. She is currently an adjunct professor at Columbia University. Please join me in welcoming them to Strand.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. There are so many faces I know and love here, and I'm super excited. Now, I usually begin all my events with, hello, everyone. My name is Mona Eltahawy, and this is my declaration of faith, fuck the patriarchy. But I'm going to be saying fuck the patriarchy so many times tonight that there's really no need for the introduction. So let's just dive right in, because I'm really excited about the conversation I'm having with my dear friend and feminist scholar and just great all-around person later. So, I wrote this book with enough rage to fuel a rocket. I knew I had to write it while I was still high on the glory of beating up a man who had sexually assaulted me. Who was this woman I had become, who looks men in the eye, seizing their gaze with my fury until their fear tells me they understand not to fuck with me? I wanted to figure her out. For years, I had been shedding shame and gaining fury. For years, I had been thumping away at patriarchy, like a piñata hanging tantalizingly just out of reach. It was stubborn, but my tenacity and ferocity became my ladder. This book is my instruction manual for smashing that piñata. Once upon a time in 1982, I was a 15-year-old girl sexually assaulted twice at Islam's holiest site in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, as I performed Hajj, the Muslim pilgrimage that is the 5th pillar of Islam. I had never been sexually assaulted before, and I froze and burst into tears. I was ashamed and traumatized, and most crucially, I was silent. It took me years before I could tell anyone what had happened when I was on my first Hajj. I did not know of the writer and poet Audre Lorde's work when I was assaulted. But as my feminism grew, I began to understand what she meant when she said, "Your silence will not protect you." And so I began to speak. And so there I was at my computer in February 2018, sharing once again that I had been sexually assaulted twice during pilgrimage in 1982 to support Sabika Khan, a Pakistani woman who had shared on Facebook her own assault in Mecca. I asked fellow Muslim women who felt safe enough to share their own experience of sexual harassment or assault, either while performing Hajj or in a Muslim sacred space. I added a hashtag to my post, #MosqueMeToo. Over 2 days, my Twitter thread was retweeted and liked thousands of times. It was shared in Indonesian, Arabic, Turkish, French, German, Spanish, and Farsi. I had never before seen such a response. At first, men demanded, "Why didn't you make more of a fuss?" Soon after, men went into full gaslighting mode, anything to persuade me I had not experienced what I had experienced, or else questioning my character as a way to undermine my story. I could write a whole other book called Things You Will Hear When You Say You've Been Sexually Assaulted. Observe. You're too ugly to be sexually assaulted. You are being paid to say this. You just want to be famous. You just want attention. You want to destroy Islam. You want to make Muslim men look bad. You're a whore. You imagined it, it was crowded. Why didn't you report it? You waited all that time. Why? What do you expect? Sexual assault happens everywhere. Why aren't you talking about sexual assault in New Zealand? You should have yelled and made a fuss. For 5 days, women from around the world shared with me their most harrowing experiences of sexual harassment and assault at pilgrimage or other sacred spaces. Reading their stories undid something that had broken in me as that young pilgrim in 1982 that I thought I had stitched together. I had not fully grasped the magnitude of being sexually assaulted at the site toward which Muslims pray 5 times a day. The experience of telling stories, and especially men's refusal to believe them, was as if I was standing in pouring rain. I could feel it drenching every part of me, only to hear the weather forecast on TV confidently explaining that it was sunny and dry, with not a drop of rain expected. Being forced to absorb the terrible violation of being sexually assaulted, but also to be robbed of a spiritual experience that so many long to experience, forced me to connect that violation with the many other violations I had been subjected to. How could all of that have happened to me? How have I absorbed it? Been forced to accept it so that I could go on every day, and how had I learned to get on with my life? For one night, I wanted some respite from that reckoning, so 5 days after I launched #MosqueMeToo, my beloved and I went to a club in Montreal to dance it off, to revel in the sensual delight of moving my body to music, in the hope that all those beats per minute would be a balm to my traumatized heart. And there, in the middle of a crowded and sweaty dance floor, at the age of 50, I felt a hand on my ass. I had exactly 2 thoughts. You've got to be fucking kidding me. And this is still happening? I remembered my 15-year-old self at Hajj, covered from head to toe with just my face and hands showing. Now, on that dance floor in Montreal, I was wearing a tank top and jeans. It didn't matter. Hijab or tank top, a man's hands still found me. And I was done. Unlike in 1982, when I could not turn around to find my assaulter, I immediately spotted my creep, who had started to walk away. As if on autopilot, I followed him and tugged so hard at the back of his shirt that he stumbled. When he fell, I sat on top of him and I punched and punched and punched his face. Once was not enough, and each time I punched him, I yelled, "Don't you ever touch a woman like that again." While I was punching the man who had assaulted me, I could see from my peripheral vision my beloved talking to 2 men who had been dancing when I started beating the man and who were now preparing to pull me off my assaulter. My beloved later told me the 2 men had wanted to stop me from punching the man who had groped me. No, he assaulted her, he told the 2 men. Let's call them the chorus for the patriarchy. My beloved continued, she's got this. It had been a long time since I had experienced as much clarity as I did in those moments. I knew exactly what I was doing, defending myself, and exactly why I was doing it. I was done with men who gave themselves the right to do as they wished with my body. If at the most sacred of temples, the holiest site of my religion, I am not safe from predatory hands, where am I safe? If at that most secular of temples, a dance club, predatory men also insist on assaulting us, where are we safe? My beloved and I went to the bar to get some water. A man who appeared to be from club management approached us and asked me to tell him what had happened. After I explained that I had beaten a man who had sexually assaulted me, he looked at my beloved and asked, "Why didn't you let your husband take care of it?" At what age does my body belong just to me? Patriarchy is so universal and normalized that it's like asking a fish what is water. Feminism must be just as universal. I want patriarchy and all who benefit from it to have the same look of terror as that man in the Montreal club who, before he ran away, took a look at me so that he could see the woman who had dared strike back. I also want feminism to be led by the non-white and the queer, who don't have the luxury of fighting only misogyny. We must fight the multiple systems of oppressions that patriarchy often intertwines itself with: racism, bigotry, homophobia, transphobia, classism, ableism, and ageism. There is much work to do. This is a moment for those of us who are not rich, white, or famous. It is a moment in which we must have a reckoning with patriarchy and in which we recognize how normalized its crimes are. Words like feminism and resistance are being drained of their meaning when we offer them up as band-aids that offer temporary relief to women and girls against the vagaries of patriarchy. I have written this book for a global audience of feminist revolutionaries. The United States is not the center of the feminist universe, but the US behaves like it's the center of all universes and the world pays it a lot of attention. Many white Americans will confidently tell you that it's shit over there for women, meaning anywhere but the US, but too often concentrating on Muslim majority countries, and in the same breath, they say, be thankful that you live over here. Such denial only serves to strengthen patriarchy and to hurt those most affected by patriarchy and the myriad oppressions it allies with. There is an unjustified overconfidence among white American women, especially about the achievements of feminism and what it has shielded them from. Few women around the world share the delusions of white American women about the achievements of feminism. Such overconfidence is one of the reasons that white American women finally began to be angry after Trump was elected. Where have they been? The fact that it took Trump to finally ignite white women's rage, not including the 47% who voted for him, and not the decades of misogyny, racism, bigotry, and other forms of discrimination that led to it, is a reminder of how privileged and sheltered white American women have been from the injustices that ignite rage in black women and girls, and for which they are punished and stereotyped. Those white women have allowed their race to trump their gender, believing that their docility, compliance, and allegiance to white supremacy will protect them from the ravages of patriarchy that the rest of us experience. They are what I call foot soldiers of the patriarchy. White women have the most privilege of expressing anger and are the last to express it, because they are sheltered from so much that ignites anger in the rest of us. Then, when white women finally find their anger, it's considered a revolution, when in reality, they are finally catching up to the revolution of rage that swept up the rest of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that reading, Mona. And this is just such a brilliant book. I've actually was honored to write a blurb for it. It's a searing, incendiary manifesto. I consider it to be a really revolutionary, explosive book. It's very political, as you can tell from the reading. But I also found it to be really intensely personal and moving. And I mean, speaking for myself, I'm a longtime feminist scholar. I've researched women's issues focusing on China. And by the way, thank you to the Strand Books for hosting my first book launch, which was this time last year. And Mona interviewed me for my book about China's feminist movement. And so it's wonderful to be here with Mona. Thank you. So one of the things that I think is really profound, I think it will be very profound for a lot of your readers. For me, you know, I've been raised by a very traditional Chinese mother who told me that I had to obey her, obey my elders, be quiet and listen to my elders, and be respectful and dutiful. And even though I've spent many years pursuing feminist research and activism, that kind of self-doubt and the shame that has been inculcated in me, I think is really common around the world. And this book is so inspiring. So I'd like you to talk about, you know, how did you come up with this idea, the 7 necessary sins? Just to explain that to us.
Thank you for your kind words, Leta. I'm really honored to be in conversation with you this time around about my book, and as you said last year, about yours. I think the idea for the book came about because of those 2 instances that I mentioned, where I started hashtag #MosqueMeToo, and then 5 days later, I started hashtag I beat my assaulter after I beat up that man in the club. And then soon after that, I was talking to an editor who I mentioned in the book, who, and I don't work for this editor. I'm not a full-time employee of this editor or his publication. But he actually took the time to explain, so he was like the managing editor, and he told the editor who was in charge of my own writing, and then he told me himself, that I should stop saying fuck on Twitter. Specifically, I don't give a flying fuck, which is one of my favorite phrases. And I was stunned. I was like, wow, all the fascist fuckery that is happening in this country. We have a fascist fuck for a president. I had just had all of these men gaslight all these experiences that I was sharing. And here was this man, a white man, of course. Here was this white man telling me that I should stop saying fuck on Twitter when he's not even my boss. So of course I did what I usually do, which is I started another hashtag why I say fuck. And I thought, wow, this is turning into a pattern, like hashtag Mosque Me Too, hashtag I beat my slaughter, hashtag why I say fuck. So I thought, this is really interesting. It's like I was gathering all of these sins. Obviously I'm playing off the 7 deadly sins. And I thought, these are necessary sins. We have to say fuck. I mean, if you don't say fuck at this time, in the world today, when the fuck are you going to say fuck? When are you going to be not just angry? Because this isn't just a book about anger. Because like I said, there's a whole bunch of books about anger right now because a lot of white women have finally discovered their anger. Congratulations, welcome to the rest of us. But what I wanted to do with this book was use anger as one of the sins, but also move beyond anger. Anger is just one of the catalyst to so much change. Audre Lorde, who I quote quite a lot in this book, said that anger is like the fuel, in the engine of change. So I thought, okay, I need to sit down and just really work out what all of the parameters of this kind of feminist, revolutionary, fuck the patriarchy kind of manifesto is, and that's how I came up with the 7 sins.
Well, it's incredibly powerful. I want to talk about some of the sins that you mentioned that we should all, or women and girls should all commit. And one is attention, to seek attention. I think this is so critical. And I want to point to you as the classic example. I mean, look at you. You're absolutely gorgeous and attention-seeking. Your, flaming red hair, your tattoos, your sequins. But as you describe in your book, that you were not born that way. How did this magnificent creature evolve?
Thank you. Actually, when I was deciding what to wear today, I thought, God, am I going to wear a sequin dress to a bookstore for my book launch? And then I thought, you know what? Do the exact opposite of what Coco Chanel said, because she was a Nazi fuck. And she said... So I was like, she said, get dressed and then take off, I don't know, something. I was like, fuck you, I'm going to get dressed and go. If it's too much, it's going to be even more. Every time I think this is too much, I'm going to put something else that makes it even more. So this attention thing is interesting, because as I say in the book, attention saved my life. Because I'm well known, because I'm famous, because people know who I am. When I was assaulted and arrested in Egypt during the year of the revolution, people made a fuss when I tweeted from police custody that I had been beaten and arrested and I was in police custody. And when I was arrested in New York the year after for spray painting over a racist ad in the subway, people made a fuss. So attention is a good thing. But I do remember a time in my life when people would say to me, anytime, and of course the pattern is this, when you do stand up to the patriarchy, when you do stand up to power, power immediately tries to reel you in by saying, oh, you're just looking for attention. And, and for a while that did used to sting, oh, I'm just looking for attention. Oh, what does that mean, Like when I spray painted over the racist ad, I was in London soon after, and I was doing an interview. I was doing some video with The Guardian or something, and I told the editor, people are accusing me of wanting attention. Don't they know that I was doing it for good reasons? My intentions were pure. They weren't for attention. And she's like, fuck them. Of course you wanted attention. Because when you get attention to what you're doing, the world pays attention to something important. And that really was a kind of like a really important mind shift for me, because I realized the role that shame was playing in that attention. And I began to connect it with, it's like, attention is like sex, I say in the book. When you want too much of it, you're immediately called a whore. And I'm like, yes, I am a whore. I want attention and I want sex, so deal with it, you know? So, and then I began to say when, especially when I started #MosqueMeToo, and I was reading through that laundry list of things that men will say to you. So men would come on Twitter and say, you just want attention. I would say, yes, actually I do. Because I'm important, and what I say is important, and I deserve attention. And I felt saying that just kind of like defanged it, you know? And I want women and girls and people who are usually reeled in by the shame of you're attention seeker, you're an attention whore, to say, yes, I want attention and I deserve it. And if you don't like it, too fucking bad.
Now, in your reading, you also said, in fact, I wrote this down. You write, you want feminism to be led by the non-white and the queer, who don't have the luxury of fighting only misogyny. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I think, the reason I started #MosqueMeToo was not just to support Sabika Khan, but it was also because, you know, as those of us who care know, Black feminist activist Tarana Burke started Me Too in 2006. But many people were not aware of Me Too because many people don't pay attention to Black girls, many people don't care what happens to Black women. And in 2017, when white actresses began to say Me Too, because powerful white men were assaulting powerful white women, because these white women are powerful, in the hierarchy of patriarchy, they are less powerful than white men, but they're definitely more powerful than I am, and they're definitely more powerful, or they have more power than the girls that Tarana Burke started Me Too for. So when they started to say Me Too and it became global, I thought, you know, good for you, you know, you're using your platform. But then I was really disturbed that it became associated with these rich, famous, powerful, privileged white women. And then it also gave men an out. Because I was seeing men say, well, I'm not those powerful white men who are assaulting these women. I'm not rich. I'm not Harvey Weinstein. I'm like, this is not what this is about. There is a hierarchy of power here. And I'm an anarchist, and I'm all about hierarchies, and I'm all about dismantling hierarchies and fighting all kinds of authorities. And so I started #MosqueMeToo because there has to be a place in Me Too for everyone. And it has to be more than powerful, rich, famous white women. So I wanted the women that I write about. So it's women, girls, non-binary people, queer people, LGBTQ people, specifically of color. And I wanted them to be foremost in my book. So I want people to see the non-white, I want people to see the non-famous, and I want people to see the non-rich. Because that's where the revolution lies. The revolution does not lie in rich, privileged, white, wealthy women in Hollywood or anywhere else.
Absolutely. This is one of the things that I love about your book as well, because everybody here in America is so obsessed with Donald Trump, and honestly, I've really had it enough. I mean, the man is evil, but there is a lot more going on in this world. And I'd like you to talk about some of the examples of incredible feminists, and one person that who really struck me was this Ugandan scholar and feminist, Stella Nyanzi. Could you talk about her?
Absolutely. I mean, Dr. Stella Nyanzi is one of my heroes, and she is exactly the non-white and the queer and the feminist leader that the revolution I talk about is. Because, so I first heard about her because I was writing the #WhyISayFuck, and I wrote a column about it before I wrote the book. And I was hearing about this incredible feminist who had been arrested in Uganda by the regime of their long-term dictator, Yoweri Museveni, who has been in power for 33 plus years, I think maybe 34 years. I'm very familiar with this kind of regime because in Egypt, Hosni Mubarak was in power for more than 30 years before we had our revolution in Egypt. And I'm sure Sisi, Trump's favorite dictator, is probably going to be in power and try to challenge that record. So there was Stella Nyanzi. I was like, why would a feminist scholar be arrested? And she was arrested for offending Yoweri Museveni. I was like, wow, this is the power of a queer black feminist offending power. And how did she offend the power of this regime that has been in place for 33 years, that has all the weapons in the world, with her words and with her support of black girls in Uganda. Because what she did was, so she was arrested, she's now in prison. But like, to cut a long story short, because I want you to read my book and read about her more in detail, she was first arrested in 2017, and she was going to be put on trial, but then she was released. And she was arrested because she called Museveni a pair of buttocks, because he had reneged on his electoral promise to end period poverty in Uganda. Because period poverty in Uganda, as around the world, affects so many girls and prevents them from going to school. And this is a very rich dictator. So Stella Nyanzi called him a pair of buttocks on Facebook. She was arrested. She was going to stand trial, but then they let her go. And then she was arrested again in 2018 because she wrote a poem to coincide with his birthday, in which she wished that his mother's vaginal canal had poisoned him during birth so that he would die. And she called him a dirty dictator, and she posted it on Facebook, and she said, "This is my address, come and beat me up." So he sent the police, and she was arrested, and she was put on trial. Now, I want you to go online and find the video from her sentencing hearing, because Stella Nyanzi was standing there in her sentencing hearing. She took off her top, she was jiggling her breasts, and during her sentencing hearing, she was videotaped into the court because they couldn't trust her to be in court. She was jiggling her breasts going, "Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you," in court. So I think of Stella Nyanzi when all these people insist that we're civil. And Stella Nyanzi represents this incredible history in Uganda called radical rudeness. And radical rudeness began in Uganda in the 1940s against British colonizers and their lackeys in Uganda. So it's basically a bunch of rich, a bunch of puritanical Victorian white men in Uganda with their local allies telling everyone to be polite. And there's nothing polite about colonization. So these anti-colonial activists in Uganda began to politically and consciously use uncivility, I guess the word is, like to say, "I don't give a flying fuck," to use incivility consciously and for political reasons to stand up against colonizers and their allies. And Stella Nyanzi continues this incredible history. She is a hero. She is a revolution in and of herself. And she's exactly what I mean when I say I want the revolution to be led by the non-white and the queer.
And you have a lot of really great, inspiring examples of these kinds of feminists around the world. I mean, you write, and I can entirely agree with you, that we're in this revolutionary moment. And in America, I think a lot of people think about the Me Too movement, which, as you pointed out, was started by this African-American civil rights activist, Tarana Burke, in 2006, but it is only after it took off kind of in Hollywood that it became viral. But what is it? Your book also is a really scathing indictment of white feminism. And why is that?
Well, I think for the reasons that I mentioned from my reading, in that I find that most white, I shouldn't, otherwise I'm going to get hashtag not all white women. I find that many white women, as we saw after the election of Donald Trump, only really pay attention after they've been personally hurt. When the Hollywood tape came out, when the Access Hollywood tape came out, and they heard Donald Trump saying, "When you're famous, women let you grab them by the pussy." And if you'd been paying attention, if you'd truly been paying attention, Donald Trump, from the beginning of his campaign, was calling Mexicans rapists and murderers, was promising to ban Muslims, was promising a whole host of horrors that he has delivered on. There are concentration camps on the border where migrant children are dying, where families are being separated. This is in the United States in 2019. So we do not have the luxury of celebrating a kind of feminism that, by and large, has been about individual achievement. And I am not about individual achievement. I'm about dismantling systems of power, and I'm about dismantling hierarchies, and I'm about challenging authorities because I'm an anarchist. And so for me, it's exactly what Bell Hooks has been saying for years. I'm against white supremacist, hetero, capitalist, imperialist patriarchy. I'm against all of those things. I do not have the luxury of just being against misogyny, because I'm of Muslim descent and there is a Muslim ban. Because the older I get, the more I identify as queer. Because I'm polyamorous, and if the authorities, if the powers that be know that I'm polyamorous, I am done for. And my next book will be about queerness in much more detail for those of you who want prurient kind of lewd details. This one is not so much about my queerness and who I have sex with, although I have sex with a lot of very interesting people. But that's for the next book. But for various reasons, it's all of those things that should make everyone furious, does not. And it just becomes, feminism has become associated with individual achievement and then this word equality. I do not want equality. I want something much more powerful than equality. I want freedom. Because when I think about equality, that means that being equal with men, and men are not free. Nobody is free in this system of white supremacist, hetero-capitalist, imperialist patriarchy, as Bell Hooks has been saying for so long. Now, white men, if you're a white, heterosexual, conservative, wealthy Christian man, you're probably the freest it gets in this country. But even if you're a man of color, you have, as I said before about the hierarchy of power, you have more freedom than I do, but you're still not free. So I don't want equality with men. I want something much bigger than that. I want freedom. And for all of those reasons, I'm making a distinct difference, or I'm distinguishing the kind of feminism that I'm advocating for in my book than what has become known as liberal feminism or white feminism. And it's too polite, it's too nice, it's too civil, and I'm fuck polite. I'm done with being nice.
Well, yeah, this is not a nice book, but it is, I think, wildly inspiring, and it is explosive. One of the most provocative chapters is on violence. Now, there will likely be people who say, well, you know, why are you encouraging women everywhere to be violent? What about non-violent civil disobedience? How do you respond to that?
Okay, well, my first response to that is that I adore and worship Nina Simone, and that line in Mississippi Goddamn, where she says, I ain't about nonviolence, honey, that is the heart of my revolution. I am not nonviolent. And as you know from the experience in the club, I definitely do fight. But you know, here's the interesting thing. I knew when I was writing this chapter that it would disturb people a lot. So basically, at the beginning of the chapter, I ask you to imagine a scenario in which we begin to kill 5 men a week. And then we begin killing 10 men a week. And then we increase it to 50 men a week. And then I ask the question, how many men do we have to kill before patriarchy sends its representative to say, okay, enough? Who do we talk to so we can stop this culling? So twice today, by a reviewer and 2 women, a woman who reviewed my book and a woman who interviewed me about my book, both of them said to me, I'm a mother of sons. I don't want anyone to kill my sons. Now, this is an imaginary scenario, and they are disturbed enough by my imaginary scenario to care about their sons and say, whoa, hold on, my sons. And yet, this is not the imaginary scenario. 3 women a day in the United States are killed by their current or former partner. This is not an imaginary scenario. And yet these women are more upset about what I'm asking them to imagine. It's incredible. So we're still protecting patriarchy. We're still protecting men. I deliberately created the beginning of that chapter to disturb as much as possible. Believe me, I should have just said, I want to declare war on men, and I will kill 100 men a week until patriarchy fucking stops killing us. What does it take? What is it going to take to get men to stop raping us? What is it going to take? How many rapists, and I'm not talking about the death penalty here, because I'm against the death penalty. I'm against violence that the state gives itself the power to enact. I'm against the death penalty. It is barbaric. And the violence that patriarchy enacts on women is barbaric. And I want that violence to end. So I want to disturb as much as possible, because I'm a massive fan of disturbance, because I want to defy, disobey, and disrupt patriarchy. So I want us, I want women, and I want non-binary people, and I want LGBT, I want a queer army of feminists to be the ones that take care of this. I want us to be doing the killing, not the state. So how many rapists should we kill before they stop raping us? That is the question that I know will disturb, but that I want people to actually think about. Instead of asking me, but what about my sons? For fuck's sake, what about your daughters? When I was asked today, I have sons, this is really disturbing, I was like, but you also have a daughter. Or someone asked me, one of the women asked me, what about the women who will say to you, but these men that you want to cull in your imaginary scenario are somebody's brothers, somebody's husband, somebody's fathers. I was like, oh, really? It's really important now to remember that there's someone's father and son and whatever. What about the women who every day, aren't they someone's mother? I don't even like to say, you know, would you do this to your mother? I want to stop being killed and raped and abused because I deserve to be free of that violence. So yes, that chapter is going to disturb a lot of people. It's going to put a lot of people off. It's going to make a lot of people very, very scared and angry, and that is good. Because that discomfort, that's where the revolution comes. That's what makes people squirm and think, wow, what about the violence that patriarchy enacts and exercises every day?
And I have to say, I am a mother of 2 sons, and I thought that was an incredibly courageous chapter, and you really need to read it. It's very powerful. So let's open it up to questions at this point. Do you want to choose?
Oh, no, just go for it. Oh, okay, over here, and then over there, and then let's do the rest.
Hi, my name is Sandus, or Sindos in Arabic. You alluded to this in your reading a bit in the introduction, but every time a story comes out about violence specifically enacted towards women within our community, the Arab and or Muslim community, and I'm thinking specifically of Isra here, who was recently killed for going out with her fiancé. I seem to hear 2 main things, one of which is people want to call out the harmful practices and issues within our community, and they want to come up with a solution. And some people want to say, well, let's focus on this is not just an Arab Muslim issue, this is global, this happens in Western communities as well. And it seems like people fight about that a lot. I know they're not mutually exclusive and both are valid, both have their limitations, but I wanted to know what you thought the best approach was to actually fixing the problems in our community and talking about them in a valid way. So.
Thank you, Sundus, for your question. And for those of you who don't know, she was referring to a Palestinian woman called Isra al-Ghraib, who was 21 years old, who was murdered by her 2 brothers and brother-in-law at the end of August, I think it was. And there were massive protests by Palestinian women. She's from Bethlehem in Palestine, and there were massive protests by Palestinian women. And because of those protests and because of the outrage they generated across the world, the Palestinian Authority has arrested 3 men who we believe are her 2 brothers and her brother-in-law. So usually, to be a woman of Arab descent or Muslim descent, or to be a woman of color generally, because I find that this applies to women across many communities. It's fucking exhausting. It really is. And the way that I describe it, for those of us who are either of Arab or Muslim descent, I also identify as of African descent. So I identify, as a woman of color. So I say that we are caught between a rock and a hard place. On one side, we have the Islamophobes and the racists who are all too eager to use our words to demonize our men, so that they can just point at the community and say, you see, we told you those men are XYZ. Build the wall, stop these barbarians coming in, etc., blah, blah, blah. And Donald Trump actually had the fucking nerve to bring this up, that he cares about women, which is why he put the Muslim ban in place. This is the man who sexually assaulted 21 women cares about women, yeah? So we've got on this one side, the Islamophobes and the racists, pretending to care about us. They don't give a flying fuck about us. They want to use, they're fighting over our head. On the other side, we have our so-called community. And they also don't care about us because they want us to shut up, because they don't want to give ammunition, they say, to this side. And they say that we make our men look bad. I'm like, I don't make anyone look bad. You make yourself plenty look bad. It's not my responsibility. And neither side cares about us. They just talk to each other over our bodies, and sometimes literally over our bodies, over our hijabs, over our niqabs, over our hymens, over everything. And so my position is, I say to the rock, fuck you. I say to the hard place, fuck you. I will never ally with the right-wing Islamophobes and the racists, and I will never be silent to assuage the community. So it's a very, very difficult and fine line that we walk. It's like dancing on a minefield, but we have to do it, because I find too many people are silent because they don't want to give ammunition to the right wing, or too many people ally with the right wing because they are so upset with the harms that the community does to us, and no one is fighting back. And this doesn't work, and this doesn't work. So my suggestion is to find your people and create your space. And these are the people who say fuck you to the right wing and fuck you to the so-called community. Over here, I think.
So in reading your chapter about violence, it made me think of something I read by Catherine McKinnon, who's also a radical feminist. She wrote an essay titled Women's September 11 because she made the sort of analogy that the same number of women who died, the same number of people who died in the Twin Towers is the same, roughly around the same number of women who are killed in the U.S. each year by men. So she kind of equates that like a sort of war, like you do in that chapter. And I thought that was really powerful, and it made it much more understandable to me, even though I consider myself kind of a pacifist. I do see how that violence is necessary, and that the necessity of that kind of violence in protecting oneself and deterring violence against oneself. But I find myself, I'm also Egyptian, and you know, you grow up with like all these rules that you have to be modest and humble and quiet and don't make a fuss, don't be loud, all these things. And I'm always like finding myself making excuses for myself why I'm not more loud or more assertive or something like that. So my question to you is, how do you learn to overcome that instinctiveness of just staying quiet and not moving during like something that's traumatizing or when someone is attacking you or something like that? How do you overcome it to actually have the strength to be violent or to say fuck or to, yeah.
Thank you for that, and hello, my fellow Egyptian. You know, it's so deeply ingrained in us. We are socialized so virulently, viciously, to not fight back, to be quiet, to be modest, to be nice, to be polite, to be kind, to be, no, I mean, kind is great, but not in the face of patriarchy, to be all of those things. And it's really interesting to, like, for me, when I first started fighting back, it was so hard to hit a man. It should not be this hard to hit a man who assaults me. It should not. So I was like, why is this so hard? And I mentioned in the book, when I was 15 years old, when I went on hajj, right? But I mentioned something else in the chapter on anger, because I begin with anger. And I mentioned an incident that happened when I was 4 years old. And I won't say exactly what happened so that other people can read the book, but you've read my book, so you know what I'm talking about. When I was 4 years old and this incident happened that should not happen to a 4-year-old, I was enraged. I was 4 years old, I was this high. I was really angry. And then when I was 15, I burst into tears and I felt ashamed and I couldn't speak. I was like, what the fuck happened to me between the age of 4 and 15? What happened? And then here I am at 50, where I'm now sitting on a man and punching the fuck out of him, you know? So I'm looking at this span of my lifetime, and I'm sharing all of this because, first of all, I want you to know that it's perfectly okay to be struggling with like, how do I say fuck? How do I fight back? Because I struggle too. And I share in great detail because a lot of young women especially come to my events and say, you know, exactly, ask me questions like you, and I think that some think that I came out of my mother's womb saying fuck the patriarchy. I wasn't born like this. You know, I love Gaga and Born This Way and all this business, but yeah, okay, I was born queer for sure, but I wasn't born saying fuck, you know? But even this queerness in me took a really long time to come out, you know? I wasn't going around telling people, oh yeah, I'm queer, I'm polyamorous when I was whatever, you know? It took me a fucking long time to be able to just have sex because you know how we're raised in Egypt, you know? So I'm sharing all of this because I want young women especially, and I say this with love, not with condescension or in a patronizing way, to know that I did not come out of my mother's womb like this. It took a really long time, and it took a lot of hard work to get to where I am now. And you will get there. You will get there. But find out the ways that you want to get there. It doesn't have to be the way that Mona tells you to get there, but you will get there.
Hello, Mona. My name is Sheila. I had the, do I call it privilege, to sit on a panel with you, CPJ, remember?
I remember last year, exactly.
And people, I want to tell you, she's tame right now because she lit up that place, you know. You said something about the book being not nice. So I borrowed my girlfriend's phone and I Googled nice, as if I never heard it I was hearing it for the first time. Marvelous, entertaining, amusing, good, satisfying, etc. I want to say that the book is all of those things. Let's reframe what nice is, right? The book is real. The book is not something that's pretentious, and mind you, I haven't really read the book yet. You know what I admire? I admire the honesty and the depth and the soulfulness of your work, of your talk, of who you are as a person, because it took me a long time to even say vagina in public. I know I'm saying it, right? Vagina, right? Or menstruation, yeah. Now we're saying that in public and that sort of thing. My daughter was raped at 13. I was raped too. My daughter was raped at 13, and when she was raped, I went and I bought a knife, a very long knife. I think they called it the scallion knife. It was long, thin, very sharp. And then I went to the police station and I asked for the captain, and I showed him the knife, and I said, if I find the man before you, I'm going to make him look like lace. I'm going to work him. I'm going to embroider his body with the knife. I was very angry. I'm still angry. And he said to me, yes, you can, because it's your daughter. The only thing, we will have to arrest you. And I was satisfied with that. And if I did find him for over 6 months, I would have killed him. That's what I would have done. And I would say that you're giving a lot of us courage, because if you ask people to do a show of hands in this room who was ever molested, I'm sure 99% of this room would. We're so ashamed. We feel as if it's our fault, it's our responsibility. We feel the shame that we can't talk about it. Because what did we do that was wrong? Oh, you're making it up because of the Me Too movement. Oh, you're doing whatever. You keep on, I don't have to like your words, but they have meaning. They have meaning. And you are speaking for me. I'm not talking about me directly, but you're speaking for many of us who can't speak for ourselves. And we'll get the courage one day to beat the shit, to beat the fuck out of somebody.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheila, for sharing that. I'm honored. Thank you.
Hi, Mona. I'm really, really excited to see you. I've been following you on Twitter. I'm also Egyptian, by the way. So this, it's hitting me. My heart is okay. I've been following you on Twitter for years, and something that I admire of you is that anytime someone says some fucked up shit to you, your response is always fire. Fuck off, kitten.
You do follow me.
It has given me a voice. Watching you respond like that unapologetically, it has given me a voice. But it has given me a voice outside of my home, where if I'm walking in the street, if I hear someone say something at work, in academia, in a professional setting, I feel like I have the power to respond. When I'm home with my Egyptian family, when I'm in Egypt with my Egyptian family, I feel again that I can't respond, it's not my place. My question to you is, on a more personal level, how have you dealt with the pressure from your family? Because even if I dye my hair red, my mom will think I've like sold my soul to the devil, right? So how have you fought against that?
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing that and for your kind words. This is the subject of a forthcoming book, because I will specifically talk about those things, because I know that a lot of people are concerned with those things exactly. I'm at a stage now where I consider myself very lucky in that when I go and visit my family, I post pictures of us on social media because I want them to see pictures of me looking like this with my mother who wears hijab. She's a doctor with a PhD and she's always worked, and she was my earliest role model of a feminist, and she'll never use the word feminist. She has a PhD in medicine. She got it at the same time as my dad did. So I grew up in a home with these two equals, but my mother would not use the word feminist. And I post those pictures because I want people to see that, you know, they still talk to me, but there was a time when they didn't. The first time ever that I wrote that I had sex outside of marriage, my own family did not speak to me for 4 months. I could not imagine that this would ever happen. Are we going to be bombed? Okay. Is this Donald Trump and something? Okay. Oh, okay. Well, I hope whoever it is okay. It's difficult. I'm saying this, I'm not going to pretend it's easy. It's really difficult. My family and I have had our ups and downs. When I began to dye my hair red and get my tattoos, because they were all fuck yous to the regime that assaulted me, my mum looked at me and said, "Your hair looks great," and said nothing about my tattoos. To this day, my mum has said nothing about my tattoos, nothing. My niece, who is now 10, once we were brushing our teeth together when she was about 6, she looked at my tattoo of the goddess Segregate, who's like the goddess of retribution and sex, and she has the head of a lion and the body of a woman, and she's all tits and hips and stuff. And my niece looked at her and she goes, "She's got big nipples." So that's the kind of impact I have on my family. So I think, we're at this really, for me, privileged impasse where we've had so many arguments, but I'm 52. This was not the case when I was much younger. It took me 8 years to take off my hijab. I wore hijab for 9 years. Hijab in Egypt, huh? It took me 8 years to take it off, and I talk about that in my first book because of my family, because they didn't want me to take it off, and then I got I'm done, and I took it off after 8 years. So I share those struggles because I want people to know, excuse me, I want people to know that it's difficult. It's difficult, but it has to be done. And for those of us who have done it, I feel that we're obliged to share kind of the stories along the way for those of us who want to do it. So I was in the UK a couple of years ago. I go to a literary festival in a working class town in the UK called Bradford. I go every year because it's a literature festival that was begun by British women of Pakistani and Muslim descent who believe that literature festivals are too white and too privileged. So I go there because I agree with them. And I spoke at a school where this 15-year-old girl, also of Pakistani Muslim descent, asked me first of all what I thought about honor killing. I thought she was doing a school project. So I said to her, "Oh, you know, it's something terrible that happens in conservative societies," and I wanted to steer her away from, you know, Muslims and honor killings. She goes, No, I'm not writing about it. I'm worried my family is going to kill me because I'm gay. This is a 15-year-old Muslim girl in Bradford. So my role and my responsibility to her is to say to her, I want you to survive. So I said to her, don't tell your family. Don't tell them you're gay. What I want you to do is, as long as you live in your parents' house and you feel that danger, eat their food, live off their money, finish your exams, get out. Go to university, get a job, whatever it is, and then be as queer as fuck. But I want you to survive, because I know that so many others don't survive. So it would be very easy for me to sit here and say, yeah, you know, I say fuck, and I'm polyamorous, and I have tweets, and the older I get, the queerer I get. Again, this did not happen overnight. It took a really long time, and I've had a million arguments with my family, but I'm 52 now, and I think they've just kind of given up. So we're at this impasse now where I respect that they are more conservative than I am, and they respect that I am not conservative. And there are things that they don't need to know. So in every book I write, I say to them, you know, you really don't need to read this one. The next one, they're definitely not reading.
Hi, Mona. My name is Malak. I'm from Palestine. I love you. So my question is, how important is it for men to be active participants in the Mosque Me Too movement? Because unfortunately, they do have a lot of fucking power in today's society. So.
Absolutely. Well, before I answer your question, Malak, and I think you dropped something that might be yours, I want to remind people that sexual assault that happens in sacred spaces doesn't just affect women and girls. As we saw so #ChurchToo was started by several Christian women and was contributed to by several Christian women about sexual assault in mostly the evangelical community, but we know what's been happening in the Catholic Church, where priests have abused boys and girls. Very soon after I started #MosqueMeToo, I was inundated by messages and I was really honored by all the sharing that happened. A Muslim man wrote to me, and he said to me, don't post this on social media, and I obviously will not say his name, but he said to me, when I was a boy and my family went on Hajj, I was sexually assaulted during Hajj. And I want people to know, no, he said, I don't want people to know. He said, I want you to know that what you're doing is really important because this isn't something that just affects women. And I'm using what he told me as an example because I'm hearing from so many men, we have to segregate our places of worship. Who's that going to protect? How's it going to protect this man when he was a boy to keep men in one place and to keep women and girls in another, when the men are also abusing the boys? That's not going to help anyone. So I want to remind the men in our community and all communities of faith that this is not about segregation. And it's also not about protection. Because I'm also hearing from Muslim men, brothers, we must protect the sisters. No, I don't want your protection. I want to be free of your abuse, because protection comes at a price. Because it's like the man in the club who said to me, why didn't you let your husband take care of it? Because my husband, first of all, doesn't exist. I don't want a husband. He's not my husband. And second of all, this is my body. I take care of this body. So this idea that Muslim men have to protect Muslim women is completely erroneous and very dangerous, because that protection comes at a price. Because that protection will be immediately revoked if you're not dressed properly. They'll sit there and they'll say to you, sister, I can see your hair. Sister, your hijab is too red. Sister, your hijab is really tight. Sister, you're laughing too loud in the mosque. Fuck you, brother. That's what I say. So, no, I don't want your protection. So this is where Muslim men come in. Muslim men have to talk to each other, and when they see this fuckery happening, they have to say, this has to stop. I do not want Muslim men to protect me. I don't want Muslim men to segregate our spaces. I want Muslim men, just like I want all men to stop fucking assaulting us. That's what I want. And I also want Muslim men, when they hear me talking about this, to stop writing to me and saying, you're making us look bad. Dude, you're making you look bad. And stop asking me to speak about sexual assault in New Zealand. I'm talking about us. So I think that their role is to basically take it up with other men. To stop trying to police or protect me, and instead start policing each other. That's what I want Muslim men to do. And to recognize that they too are in danger, and their children, men, boys and girls. Just like the boys and girls being abused by the priests, there are boys and girls being abused in mosques, there are boys and girls being abused in synagogues, there are boys and girls being abused in every place of worship, because those men who hold the power in places of worship use that power and the sanctity of the space to silence and shame us.
Do we have time for one more question? Or one last question?
Hi, my name's Aaliyah. I'm a sophomore in high school, and so with all that's going on in the world right now, it's clear that ideas have advanced, and that this idea of revolution and what you're talking about have clearly become more advanced and more widespread, but it feels like nothing's really changing, nothing tangible is changing, and it's exhausting. It feels like things are stagnant, and it's really tiring for people who are affected by it, and for everyone who, we say all these things, we believe all these things, but at the end of the day, we're tired of moral victories. Yeah. We're tired of it. So I guess this leads to the question of, is it worth it to unite behind a common cause, even if it's not, like, as like a feminist community, even if it's not the most radical, or to get things done in a more pragmatic sense, or should we continue with the way we're going, where it's not guaranteed that things will be done and it will still be stagnant, but our ideas will advance and people's minds will eventually change, although people are still being affected day to day?
Right. Okay. Thank you, Aliyah. I'm so glad you're here because, as the title of my book makes it clear, this is a book about women and girls. And I include in the book two young women. One of them is 16 years old, Greta Thunberg, the climate activist who's going to be at the climate strike. And I also include a Saudi teenager called Rahaf, who escaped from Saudi Arabia and is now living in Canada in exile. And I include those stories because I want to include stories of young women of your generation, because it's really important. This is not a book written by a 52-year-old woman telling you what to do. This is a book written by a 52-year-old woman who is sharing her experiences across, of the various ages, who recognizes and wants you and your generation to take over. I am not going to be here that much longer. I mean, I hope I am around for a bit. But you're going to be, I hope, and I sincerely hope, around much longer than I am. So this is not me sitting here haranguing you about what you should and shouldn't do, although I do love to lecture people about fucking the patriarchy, but I want you to know that you are taking over. So whether it's a fight, the more radical fight, or the fight where you unite with people, I think all of those fights are necessary. My fight is a more radical fight. I'm not a big proponent or believer in change from within, because I'm an anarchist, and I fight authority from the outside. But there are people that we will need on the inside, and if someone is comfortable fighting in alliance with others whose ideas and beliefs don't completely ally with them, that's fine, go ahead and have that fight. But we need the radicals like me on the outside giving everyone a really fucking hard time, because that's all of that will bring about change. So, and I also don't want you to despair, because I love the idea that this 16-year-old girl, Greta Thunberg, is making rich, middle-aged white men shit in their pants. When I see what they say about her, I'm like, my God, this is a 16-year-old teenager, and you guys, she's turned their world upside down, because she's basically telling them, what you're doing is ruining the world, which it is, and all they want to do is become more rich and more powerful. And this 16-year-old girl has driven them crazy. This is the power of a 16-year-old girl with a powerful voice. This is the power of a 16-year-old girl who's saying, I will change the world. And a 16-year-old girl saying, I will change the world, terrifies the patriarchy. So continue, please, to believe in change, because I'm a tenacious optimist. I'm much older than you. I should have become cynical, but I don't have a cynical bone in my body, because I truly believe in the revolution, and I truly believe in you and your generation of continuing that revolution.
So it's more on a political note instead of the personal note. I'm also Egyptian, and I've been having a hard time understanding what our role could be as Egyptian women living abroad. You mentioned the term feminist internationalism in your book, and I was wondering, what do you feel could be the role of the feminist internationalism in the face of the very repressive and dangerous regime, and our role as Egyptian women living abroad? Especially adding on to the comment that you made about survival. I recently wrote a thesis on, I basically shat on the Egyptian regime and the military-industrial complex, and I was told by my university that I was not allowed to publish it for safety reasons, which I very much understand. But it led me to think, what can I do with all of this information and the fire that we all feel, seeing what's happening and what continues to happen, and how can we stay safe but still do something? Thank you.
Thank you. I salute you for your thesis, and I salute you for your work, and for the urgency which I know infuses that work, because this is a really, really fucking terrible time. We have a fascist fuck of a president here who jokes that Sisi is his favorite dictator. And we also have a president here who's basically, because of Saudi money, basically saying we're going to fight whatever war the Saudis want because they pay cash, So it's like the highest bidder. It's an outrageous time. But it's also necessary to remember that successive US administrations have always done this with Egypt. Donald Trump is the fruition of decades of corrupt US administration policies when it comes to Egypt. He did not invent this. We've had Democrats and Republicans in the White House basically arm our regime to the teeth and believe in this strong-arm dictator stability bullshit at our expense in Egypt. So so that I don't just kind of go on a rant about what the US administrations have done with Egypt, about Egypt, which you know, and I hope others in the room know, what we can do, I think, is unite with those fighting the administration here, because so much of what happens in Egypt and in the Middle East has to be fought here, because they have to stop sending us weapons. They most likely won't, but we have to still agitate for it. They have to start paying attention to human rights violations. In the past, they used to pay lip service to it. Now, Trump doesn't even pay lip service to it. But there is an increasing opposition to that in Congress. I'm seeing some senators and I'm seeing some representatives who do want to change that. But we have to ally with activists here. We have to ally with activists, for example, in Brazil, who are also facing a fascist dictator there. Allies in India who are facing a fascist dictator there over what he's recently done in Kashmir. You know, and in so many other parts of the world. So I think in this period where the American president is so unashamedly, unabashedly, fascist and supporting our regimes, we have to find those who are fighting Trump as well and collectively fight together, because it is a similar fight. I want you to be safe. I don't want you to be arrested in Egypt, because they are arresting, or worse, because they are arresting and doing worse in Egypt. But also because you have so much knowledge that is necessary. Hope you can share it with those who need to hear it here, because they need to hear how bad what the impact of US administration policies is on other countries, because a lot of Americans are completely oblivious. So let's try to find ways of allying with people who are fighting the administration here, but also amplifying the voices of people back in Egypt. Those who can't speak for whatever reason. Everyone has a voice, but if we can't hear that voice, let's try to amplify that voice.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And again, this is the 7 necessary sins for women and girls. It's fabulous. Thank you so much, Mona.
Thank you.
We're going to switch over to a signing now. So if you already have a book and want to get it signed, if you could line up in this aisle over here.